Ladies and gentlemen, what if I told you that the person who seemed the strongest, the most confident, the most in control is actually hiding a level of suffering so deep it could change the way you see everything they've ever done to you? Tonight, you're not just going to learn the signs, you're going to uncover the hidden truth behind a narcissist's deepest pain, the truth they never wanted you to see. Because once you understand what's really happening behind their mask, behind their anger, behind their need for control, you'll finally reclaim the power they tried so hard to take from you. Stay with me. This will change everything. A narcissist's entire identity is built on a mask, an idealized version of themselves that they carefully polish, protect, and display to the world. This mask is not just decoration, it is their emotional survival kit. It hides the insecurity they can't admit, the shame they can't process, and the fear they can't confront. When this mask begins to crack even slightly, it reveals a truth they desperately want to keep buried. You'll notice small slips, a moment where their confidence wavers, where their charm feels forced, where their reactions don't match the situation. These cracks aren't accidents. They are signals of emotional strain, signs that the performance is collapsing under its own weight. And because narcissists depend on that mask to feel powerful, any threat to it feels like a threat to their entire existence. The moment someone sees through them, even a little, they feel exposed in a way that is unbearable. Their voice may shake or their tone may shift from charming to defensive in seconds. They may try too hard to impress or suddenly become cruel, dismissive, or distant. These sudden changes happen because the mask is slipping and they fear you're noticing. Underneath that false confidence lies a fragile self that is terrified of being ordinary, unimportant, or unworthy. This is why the cracking of the mask is one of the clearest signs they are suffering internally. Maintaining their image requires constant energy, constant control, and constant validation. When they are tired, stressed, or emotionally overwhelmed, they can't hold the mask up as tightly, and the truth beneath it, the insecurity, the emptiness, the pain, begins to leak through. In those moments, their suffering becomes visible, not because they admit it, but because the truth can no longer stay hidden. And once that mask begins to crack, the second truth reveals itself almost instantly, flowing naturally from the first like a shadow following light. When a narcissist can no longer hold their identity together, when the charm slips and the illusion grows thin, they become terrified of losing the one thing that allows them to feel powerful: control. Control is not just a habit for them, it is the oxygen they breathe. It is the force that keeps the broken parts of their inner world from collapsing. So when someone pulls away, becomes emotionally neutral, or simply stops reacting, the narcissist feels the ground shift beneath their feet. The loss of control is not a small inconvenience. It is an emotional earthquake. This is where their suffering deepens. They sense that the person who once responded to their anger, praise, manipulation, or guilt is no longer moved. Your silence becomes louder than their words. Your calm becomes stronger than their chaos. And in that shift, a panic rises inside them because control was the glue holding their identity together. When you stop feeding their need for reaction, they feel as if they are disappearing. The loss of control isn't just about losing influence over you, it symbolizes losing the ability to regulate their own fragile sense of worth. They begin to grasp for control in ways that seem irrational, sending mixed messages, provoking arguments, or suddenly becoming overly sentimental. All desperate attempts to pull you back into the emotional arena. Their reactions become unpredictable because their internal world is unraveling. And just like the mask that slipped before, this desperation is not about love or connection. It is about survival. When a narcissist can no longer control the emotional landscape around them, the suffering they tried so hard to hide becomes impossible to conceal, revealing how deeply dependent they were on the illusion of power. And as that desperation to regain control intensifies, something even more revealing begins to surface, something that flows directly from the chaos they feel inside. When a narcissist loses control of the emotional environment around them, they also lose the ability to regulate themselves. Their emotions, which were once tightly managed behind charm, manipulation, or confidence, begin to erupt in ways that expose their inner turmoil. This is where the third keynote emerges. Their suffering becomes visible through explosive, unpredictable anger. This anger is not strength, it is fear wearing armor. It is the rage of someone who feels their carefully constructed world slipping away and has no safe way to process the panic rising inside them. When their mask cracks and their control dissolves, they feel naked and exposed, and anger becomes the quickest shield they can reach for. It's an instinctive reaction, a reflex meant to push others back, regain dominance, or distract from the emotions they do not know how to handle. Their anger can appear suddenly, even in moments that don't call for it. A simple question becomes an attack. A neutral comment becomes a threat. A small disagreement becomes a battlefield. These reactions are not logical because they aren't rooted in the present. They are rooted in old wounds, unhealed shame, and a lifelong fear of being powerless. Anger allows them to momentarily feel big when inside they feel unbearably small. And the more their anger grows, the more obvious their suffering becomes. Because anger, for a narcissist, is not an expression of control. It is a confession of how deeply they are losing it. It reveals the emotional storm they are fighting within, a storm they desperately try to hide but can no longer contain. In those moments, their rage is not about you. It is a window into a fragile self unraveling under pressure, showing just how painful it is for them when their identity begins to collapse. And after the anger erupts, after the storm of their emotions spills into the room, something even more telling begins to unfold. Something that connects perfectly with the chaos inside them. Because once a narcissist realizes that anger hasn't restored their control and hasn't rebuilt the mask that cracked, they turn to the next survival tactic they've relied on their entire lives, the desperate need to be seen. This is where the fourth keynote emerges, flowing naturally from their emotional unraveling. Their suffering becomes visible through their intense hunger for attention, validation, and significance. You'll notice them becoming louder, more dramatic, more performative. They exaggerate their achievements, retell the same stories, or highlight their favorite traits as if repeating them will make them real again. This is not confidence. It is fear in disguise. They fear becoming invisible. They fear being forgotten. They fear losing the identity they depend on the world to mirror back at them. Their sense of worth is not internal, it is borrowed from the reactions of others. So when their world feels unstable, they seek recognition like someone gasping for air, and this hunger grows even stronger after their anger fails to pull you back emotionally. That failure triggers a deeper panic inside them, a fear that the spotlight is fading and they are standing alone in the dark. So they chase attention more aggressively. They post for praise. They fish for compliments. They suddenly highlight their hardships or victories to stir empathy or admiration. Every move becomes a plea, tell me I matter, show me I still exist. What they don't realize is that their need to be seen reveals how much they fear disappearing into the background of life. Their suffering becomes impossible to hide because the person who once acted superior now appears emotionally starving, dependent on others to feel whole. And the louder they become, the clearer it is that they are fighting an internal emptiness that no amount of attention can ever fill. And once that desperate hunger for attention begins to rise, once they start chasing validation with trembling urgency, another layer of their suffering begins to surface, one that connects perfectly with everything unraveling inside them. When the applause fades, when the admiration doesn't land the way they hoped, when the spotlight fails to quiet the chaos within, the narcissist turns backward instead of forward. This is where the fifth keynote reveals itself. They become trapped in their past, replaying old wounds, old betrayals, and old stories because the present feels too unstable to stand on. You'll notice that whenever their need to be seen is not fulfilled, they suddenly bring up events from years ago, moments where someone wronged them, doubted them, or failed to treat them as the special person they believe themselves to be. They retell these stories with the same emotional intensity as if the wound happened hours ago. This is not coincidence. It is their attempt to re-anchor themselves in a narrative where they are the victim or the hero, because the present moment makes them feel small, unseen, or out of control. This emotional recycling is their way of escaping the emptiness attention could not fill. When validation doesn't quiet their insecurity, they return to old pain, because it is familiar. It gives them a script where they know how to feel powerful, important, or justified. They cling to past grievances like lifelines, hoping that reliving the wound will help them avoid the deeper pain they fear facing within themselves. And the more they dig into their history, the clearer their suffering becomes. They are not reminiscing, they are drowning. They cannot let go because the past is the only place where their identity feels stable, even if that stability is built on anger, shame, or victimhood. Their suffering shows itself in this desperate loop, proving that they are emotionally stuck in wounds they never healed, wounds that shape every reaction, every fear, and every attempt to regain the sense of self that is slipping from their hands. And as they cling to those old wounds, replaying them like a scratched record stuck on the same painful note, another truth begins to rise from beneath the surface, one that connects perfectly with their escape into the past. Because the deeper reason they return to those memories is not just familiarity, it is fear. The sixth keynote reveals itself here. A narcissist suffers most when they feel unseen because their entire identity depends on external validation to exist. When they sense that people are no longer reacting, no longer admiring, no longer feeding their emotional hunger, they experience a kind of psychological disappearance, and that disappearance terrifies them. Their past becomes a refuge because the present feels like a battlefield where no one notices them anymore. When you stop giving them the emotional energy they once lived on, they feel as though they are fading out of relevance. To them, being unseen is not a quiet moment. It is an emotional death. Their sense of self is not built from within. It is sculpted by the reflections they see in others. Without those reflections, they cannot feel real. So when attention slips away, when their stories no longer impress, when their anger no longer provokes, and when their attempts for validation fall flat, their suffering intensifies. They scramble to reclaim visibility. They might exaggerate their achievements, share dramatic stories, or unexpectedly show vulnerability that feels out of character. These behaviors are not expressions of authenticity. They are survival mechanisms. They are saying, "Look at me, don't forget me. Don't let me disappear." The tragedy is that no amount of external attention can soothe the internal emptiness they carry. The moment they feel unseen, their old wounds reopen, feeding the narrative that they are unimportant, unloved, or easily replaced. This is why their suffering is so profound, because their entire identity depends on others noticing them. And the moment that spotlight dims even slightly, their internal world begins to collapse, revealing just how fragile and dependent their sense of self truly is. And once they begin to fear that they are becoming invisible, once the absence of attention makes them feel like they are fading from existence, their inner panic pushes them toward an even more desperate behavior. It connects directly and naturally with that fear of being unseen. Because when a narcissist realizes they can no longer pull reactions from you, no anger, no hurt, no confusion, no emotional spark, they face a truth they were never prepared to handle. They have lost the ability to influence your inner world. And this is where the seventh keynote reveals its full weight. When a narcissist cannot manipulate your emotions anymore, when your calm becomes unshakable, it sends them into a deep spiral of suffering because their identity relied on controlling how you felt. To a narcissist, emotional influence is not optional. It is the foundation of their sense of power. It assures them that they matter, that they still hold significance, that they still exist in your psychological landscape. So when your reactions stop, when your expressions become steady, when your energy no longer bends toward them, it feels like losing the last thread of control they had left. And in that space of emotional neutrality, they feel powerless for the first time. They may try harder, using guilt, pity, anger, charm, or even sudden affection to pull you back into the emotional dance. They might shift tactics rapidly, sweet one moment, cruel the next, hoping something will crack your calm. But when nothing works, when you remain steady and unmoved, they confront the emptiness they've spent their entire life avoiding. This loss of emotional influence forces them to face themselves, something they desperately fear. Without your reactions to shape their sense of importance, they feel hollow, insignificant, and unanchored. And that emptiness, that inability to affect you anymore, becomes one of the deepest forms of suffering they experience, because it reveals that the power they believed they had over you was never real, and now they have nothing left to hold on to. And when they can no longer influence your emotions, when every tactic that once worked now falls flat against your calm, something even more revealing happens, something that grows naturally out of their panic and desperation. Because losing emotional control over you doesn't just make them feel powerless in the present, it forces them into a confrontation with their deepest, oldest wounds. This is where the eighth keynote quietly steps forward. Narcissists begin to relive old betrayals, old rejections, old humiliations with an intensity that shows just how trapped they are in their own past. They replay these memories because they cannot handle the emptiness that comes from losing their emotional grip on someone in the present. When they feel they no longer affect you, their mind reaches backward, grasping for meaning, identity, and justification. Every unresolved hurt resurfaces. Every childhood wound becomes alive again. Every moment someone made them feel small or forgotten suddenly explodes into their awareness. Your emotional neutrality becomes a mirror, reflecting all the pain they have spent years burying under arrogance, manipulation, and control. And because they cannot sit with these feelings or process them in a healthy way, they cling to these old stories as if reliving them will somehow restore the sense of power they just lost. This is why a narcissist caught in suffering suddenly talks about past betrayals with fire in their voice. They aren't sharing memories, they're drowning in the emotions those memories carry. And with no current control to hold on to, the past becomes their last refuge, their last proof that they have been wronged, underestimated, or mistreated. It becomes a shield against the reality that they can no longer influence you. Their mind loops through pain because the present feels unbearable. And the more the past floods in, the clearer their suffering becomes. They are not just revisiting old stories. They are escaping into them, trying to rebuild an identity that is slipping through their fingers. This is the suffering they never show openly, the suffering that fuels their behavior, being forever trapped between the pain they cannot heal and the person they can no longer control. And as they sink deeper into those old memories, clinging to past wounds as if they are lifelines, another truth begins to surface, one that flows naturally from their emotional imprisonment. Because when a narcissist is forced to revisit their unresolved pain, when the past becomes louder than the present, it awakens the fear that has lived inside them since the beginning, the fear of abandonment. This is where the ninth keynote reveals its full force. Narcissists fear being left more than anything else, and when they sense they can no longer influence you, when they feel you slipping out of their emotional orbit, that ancient terror rises and takes over every part of their behavior. This fear is not simple sadness or loneliness. It is a primal panic, a sinking feeling that they are about to be swallowed by the same emptiness they have tried to out-are on their whole lives. When they lose access to your emotions, when their tactics stop working, it mirrors every moment they ever felt unworthy, unseen, or forgotten. Your calm becomes the echo of every abandonment they could not process, every rejection they never healed from. They may act angry, cold, indifferent, or superior, but inside they are terrified of being left behind. Their desperation intensifies. They may suddenly become clingy, sentimental, or overly affectionate, or they may turn cruel, using explosive anger or guilt to pull you back. Some shift rapidly between the two, hoping something, anything, will stop the feeling of losing you. Because to them, abandonment is not just losing a person, it is losing the emotional anchor that tells them they matter. This fear fuels their loops into the past, their need for control, their hunger for validation. It is the core wound beneath every behavior. And as you pull away emotionally, as you reclaim your peace, this fear grows stronger, revealing itself in every desperate attempt to pull you back. The truth is, when a narcissist believes they are being abandoned, they are not just reacting to the present. They are reliving every moment they ever felt unloved. And that fear becomes the engine of their deepest suffering, pushing them into behaviors that expose how fragile their inner world truly is. And once that fear of abandonment grips them, once they feel that familiar terror rising from the depths of their past, a final and devastating realization begins to take shape inside them, one that flows naturally from the panic of losing you. Because when a narcissist senses that you are truly slipping away, when they feel the emotional doors closing, no matter how much they push, provoke, or plead, they are forced to confront something they never believed possible. They cannot control the impact of their loss. And this is where the 10th keynote comes alive. A narcissist suffers more deeply than ever when they realize they cannot dictate how you remember them, how you heal from them, or how you move forward without them. For someone who survives by manipulating perceptions, by shaping the narrative, by influencing how others see them, the idea that you might walk away with your own truth is unbearable. They wanted to be the hero in your story, or at least the force you could never escape. But when they feel you calming your heart, reclaiming your peace, and rewriting your own narrative, it shatters the illusion of power they held over your life. They cannot control your healing. They cannot control your silence. They cannot control the version of them you carry into the future. And that loss of narrative control cuts deeper than any abandonment ever could. This is the moment their suffering peaks. They realize the story is no longer theirs to shape. They realize you are slipping out of the frame they built. They realize you are no longer a character in their script, but an author of your own. And in that moment, they feel the full weight of the truth they've spent their entire lives avoiding. No matter how hard they try, no matter how deeply they fear, no matter how loudly they demand significance, they cannot control the meaning of losing someone who finally chose themselves. Their suffering comes from this final loss of power. The realization that once you walk away, the narrative they fought to dominate dissolves, and they are left alone with the consequences of their own behavior. And as we step back and look at the full picture, a truth begins to shine through all the chaos, the manipulation, the fear, and the emotional storms. A narcissist's suffering, no matter how loud or hidden, is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of their wounds. It is a mirror of the bat. Lest they never fought, the shadows they never faced, and the identity they built on fragile foundations. Understanding this doesn't mean you excuse their behavior. It means you finally see the dynamic for what it truly is, a cycle you were never meant to carry, fix, or absorb. Their pain is real, but it is not your responsibility. Their fear is deep, but it does not belong to you. Their emotional hunger is endless, but you are not meant to be the one who feeds it. Instead, this understanding becomes your freedom. When you recognize the signs of their suffering, you regain your clarity. You stop personalizing their anger. You stop internalizing their accusations. You stop letting their chaos dictate your peace. And in that moment, your power returns. The calm you choose becomes stronger than the control they crave. The silence you keep becomes louder than their emotional storms. For the first time, you see that walking away is not abandonment, it is liberation. So as you leave this message tonight, carry this truth with you. You are not weak for caring, and you are not cold for choosing distance. You are simply someone who finally understands the game and refuses to play it anymore. And that is the moment a narcissist loses their grip, not because you fought them, but because you healed yourself. Your clarity becomes your armor, your peace becomes your strength, and your future becomes your own.